Today we're talking about Amazon's antitrust paradox. This is a scholarly article written by Lina, who is now the chair, I want to say is the title, of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. She represents the FTC. She wrote this while she was still at Yale Law School before her tenure at the FTC. But it has become one of the most widely cited articles in the area of antitrust law. It is extremely interesting, and there's a lot that I want to talk about. I'm going to go through these notes, and I'm really only addressing the first 30 pages of this article right now. I believe it's a 96-page document in total. I'm sure that there's references and citations at the end, but before I get into the details of this, I want to call out one thing up front, which is the appreciation that I have for the way that Lina has approached this article and in conveying her message and making her argument. She has masterfully identified the concepts that need to be addressed. And that is something that I want to take away, aside from the technical learnings that I'm getting from this, the ability to identify concepts and assign them to topics or policies and things like that. That's something that I want to develop. So, for example, to highlight what that looks like, the premise here is essentially she's identified that antitrust law began with this idea of a structure-based view of competition, and that was replaced by a more consumer welfare oriented view of antitrust law, or interpretations of antitrust law. And I'm not super familiar with antitrust history, law, or anything. That's part of the reason why I'm working on this and taking these notes and studying this, is so that I can become more familiar. And I only mention that because I'm not sure how much of this conceptualization of the topics is solely Lina, because I believe that, we'll get into this, but someone by the name of Bork perhaps first made that distinction. But regardless, I do think that it's an important takeaway for me. It's something that I think I can apply to something like the arbitrary power argument. The reason why I like it is because it provides a nice framework for your argument and helps to envision the scope of how to view the issues at hand, rather than isolated events and examples that you're using to support the thing. So the core framework here has to do with the structure and the differences between the structure. The approach, maybe, is the way to see it. And then examples are used to support the claims of that. So without getting too into the weeds on that, let's get into Amazon's antitrust paradox. So one of the most significant changes in antitrust law and the interpretation of antitrust law over the last century has been the move away from economic structuralism, so it's a structure-based view of competition that was replaced by price theory. And so economic structuralism asserts that concentrated market structures promote anti-competitive forms of conduct. So it's looking at the structure. This is because, one, monopolistic and oligopolistic market structures enable dominant actors to coordinate with greater ease and subtlety, facilitating conduct like price fixing, market division, and tactic collusion. Two, monopolistic and oligopolistic firms can use their existing dominance to block new entrants, that is, entrants to the market competition. Three, monopolistic and oligopolistic firms have greater bargaining power against consumers, suppliers, and workers, which enables them to hike prices and degrade service and quality while maintaining profits. So that's like a fundamental thing to grasp, that I think I'm going to wait to talk about until later on. So moving on to what happened and where this change kind of began was there's this Chicago school, which she describes as the Chicago school thinking, which introduced price theory in the 70s and 80s. And the foundation of price theory is a faith in the efficiency of markets propelled by profit-maximizing actors. It's quoted as rational economic actors working within the confines of the market seek to maximize profits by combining inputs in the most efficient manner. A failure to act in this fashion will be punished by the competitive forces of the market, end quote. So I guess right here we can pause and try to highlight the differences there. Again, it'll become more clear as we go on, but so the economic structuralism, or the reason why concentrated market structures promote anti-competitive forms of conduct, right? We address that here. Looking at the structure of it holds actors in that market accountable to the influence of the structure of that market. Maybe I have to focus on the price theory side of it. Essentially, this is sort of and we'll see, Reagan was a catalyst to the price theory side of this. So you can see, at least in modern terms, price theory is aligned with a lot of modern right-wing economic beliefs. This idea of the market will correct itself. Like the market will, if you don't touch it, it'll be completely fine. And that if there was an issue, and here's the thing, if the structure becomes endangered, that competitors would hold the bad actor accountable, and that's the competitive forces of the market. Let's go on, because we haven't touched on enough to make the distinction super clear yet. So economic structuralism is an industrial structure, or asserts that industrial structure predisposes firms towards certain forms of behavior that then steer market outcomes. So, and then on the other side, the Chicago School asserts that market outcomes reflect the interplay of standalone market forces and technical demands of production. So the Chicago School would argue that what exists is ultimately the best guide to what should exist. And I think that that's extremely flawed thinking. That what exists is ultimately the best guide to what it should exist. That's a really problematic way of seeing anything, much less our economy. That I think it's, especially when you factor in history, which we will get to in a bit, it's been shown time and time again that what exists isn't always there because that's the only thing that should exist. It's because the actors at play have rigged the market in such a way that it makes it extremely hard for any competitors to be able to stay afloat. And so it's less about being the thing that should exist and more about rigging the game. Oh, I was going to drive that home and I lost it in a second. Whatever. Let's move on. There's two major ramifications of this shift. There's a significant narrowing of the concept of barriers to entry. An entry barrier is a cost that must be borne by a firm seeking to enter an industry but is not carried by firms already in the industry. The Chicago School takes that advantages from economies of scale, capital requirements, and product differentiation do not constitute entry barriers. On this view, market power is always fleeting, hence antitrust is rarely needed. And so one thing that we will get into later on is how original antitrust laws came to be, the intention behind those laws, which are very clear and were upheld for a very long time, which directly contradict this idea that market power is always fleeting, hence antitrust is rarely needed. And to examine that a little bit closer, that is claiming that any company's standing in a market is always fleeting, it's never guaranteed, and so antitrust isn't really needed. But the problem with that is there is so let's hypothetically say, and the railroads or the sugar example, let's stick to the railroads because I know them a little bit better, got very close to a true monopolies, and or the purest, the most iconic idea of a monopoly. And even when they had issues, or when the issues arise that moment that should support this claim that market power is always fleeting, it's unable to come to fruition if we allow monopolies of that size to generate. Because the fleeting nature of it would be realized when, in a normal market, competitive market structure, a company acts in a way that would normally allow the competition to overtake them, and that doesn't happen when there's no competition. Again, I'm kind of botching the explanations. It all makes sense in my head, but maybe I should just keep going through the notes first. The second major ramification of this shift from structure to price theory is consumer prices became the dominant metric for assessing competition. So this is where Robert Bork comes in. He asserted that the sole normative objective of antitrust should be to maximize consumer welfare, best pursued through promoting economic efficiency. Although Bork used consumer welfare to mean allocative efficiency, courts and antitrust authorities have largely measured it through effects on consumer prices. In 1979, the Supreme Court followed Bork's work and declared that Congress designed the Sherman Act as a consumer welfare prescription, and that's in quotes, consumer welfare prescription, a statement that is widely viewed as erroneous. That's important to note. Like economists and legal scholars widely view that claim as erroneous. And then in 1982, Reagan changed the merger guidelines. So the merger guidelines depart from the 1968 guidelines that established the primary role of merger enforcement to be to preserve and promote market structures conducive to competition. In 1982, the change said mergers, quote, should not be permitted to create or enhance market power, defined as ability of one or more firms' profitability to maintain prices above competitive levels, end quote. Today, price starts the conversation rather than concern for innovation or non-price effects. So the conversation around antitrust law begins with price and consumer relationship to that price, rather than innovation, product quality, variety, innovation, entrepreneurial opportunity, or competition. It starts with price. So economic factors that are easier to measure, such as impacts on price, output, or productive efficiency in narrowly defined markets, have become disproportionately important. So that is one of the significant ramifications, is we have placed a disproportionate importance on price output or productive efficiency, rather than the structures that allow those outcomes to occur. Two areas of enforcement this reorientation has affected dramatically are: 1, predatory pricing, and 2, vertical integration. And the Chicago School asserts that these never or almost never reduce consumer welfare. So the claim is that predatory pricing and vertical integration never or almost never reduce consumer welfare. And so we're going to examine predatory pricing and vertical integration and what those are to see why that Chicago School's thinking is flawed, and then how those are tied to economic structuralism rather than price theory. So predatory pricing, through the mid-20th century, Congress repeatedly enacted legislation targeting predatory pricing. Numerous examples of this. Congress saw predatory pricing as a tool to concentrate control. Laws prohibiting predatory pricing were a part of a larger arrangement of pricing laws that sought to distribute power and opportunity, and in turn increase competition. And then this idea of a recoupment test attacked this movement and had a lot of intellectual backlash, and really became a restrictive point of view when assessing antitrust law and predatory pricing. So Standard Oil is one of the earliest predatory pricing cases, if not the earliest, the first. And one of the things that was established in that case was that price cutting is the most effective weapon of the larger corporation. So what happens in price cutting is a corporation or a company, larger company that has control of, in sort of the monopolistic sense, control of a lot of the different avenues in the market, and is operating at a certain standard, right? Their practice of price cutting, they reduce their prices, and it's a temporary price cut specifically designed to push out competition, as the competition needs to try to compete with those lower prices. That might require them to operate at loss or just not be able to keep up, and pushes them out of the market. Once that happens, this larger corporation can then jack up the prices again. And we'll get into some of the nuances about that in a second. Recognizing the threat of predatory pricing, Congress passed a series of laws prohibiting such conduct. And so I had a note here that it seems kind of irrelevant, but still want to address it because it came up at this moment for some reason. I was thinking about the paradox of the heap at this moment. At what level of contribution to a community justifies the existence of a business? And I think that a company shouldn't have to do as much as is required today to stay afloat. And I think that this is somewhat tied to predatory pricing and things like that. For example, Walmart, right? Or actually, yeah, this is great. Walmart, Amazon, Target, any of the big box stores, right? Made it extremely hard for any small businesses to be able to keep up, to be able to do that, to offer the prices that they're offering, because as a small business you can't put in the large orders to get a discount, and you can't generate the same level of profits because that's not really your goal anyway, right? And so I think back to a lot of historical context here. The general store owner or specialty offering type of place, these small businesses that used to be all over the place and that you could, get by and live your life, even if it meant you were kind of scraping by, you could still do that without having that many customers. Right? So I just think that there is maybe at least we need to have a rough idea of what should be required of a small business in order to be able to exist, because we need that. And if we don't actively pursue that, small businesses can't keep up with the large companies and the offerings that they have, and eventually that will mean small businesses become extinct. Or more importantly, you have to have a home run of a small business in order to exist, or be extremely lucky in a densely populated area with a lot of foot traffic that just kind of gets whatever. So I don't know, that was just a thought that I had right there. So then in 1914 there is the Clayton Act, which was designed to strengthen the Sherman Act being the original antitrust laws established. And they included a provision to curb price discrimination and predatory pricing. Congress also acted to protect fair trade laws. And sort of the last notable extension of these original antitrust laws was the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936, which prohibited price discrimination by retailers among producers and by producers among retailers. Its aim was to prevent conglomerates and large companies from using their buying power to extract crippling discounts from smaller entities. I think that this had the context of this was I misunderstood it originally, because I think it's more like, say, a Walmart is basically the sole business for a small producer, and then Walmart says that they'll take their business elsewhere if they don't bring their prices down, and so they're dictating the terms of production in such a way that the producer literally runs itself out of business to keep Walmart as a client. And other ways around. So just like laws banning predatory pricing, the prohibition against price discrimination effectively curbed the power of size, which again, that's a concept that I have addressed without the correct label in my arbitrary power argument, which is the power that size provides a company just for its size, that it arbitrarily can leverage its size for an advantage. So the court upheld the Robinson-Patman Act numerous times. So again, these things are important, noting that the Sherman Act, and then additionally having extensions of the Sherman Act over time, over nearly 100 years, I think, expanding on these ideas numerous times. They've been upheld, the intention very clear. And then with Bork and the Chicago school gaining popularity in the 70s, the number of Robinson-Patman cases that the FTC brought dropped dramatically. And then Reagan all but entirely abandoned Robinson-Patman. So getting into Bork's work a little bit, Bork's work shows that the success of predatory pricing is inherently uncertain. That's the claim, that it's inherently uncertain. The short-run loss is definite, but the long-run gain depends on successfully neutralizing the competition. So this is the idea, again, predatory pricing, you drop your prices to push the competition out. When you drop your prices, you do experience losses, obviously, right? And so the claim here is that the outcome of anti-competitive practices is uncertain because it requires the actor to neutralize the competition in this way. So the only guarantee is that the prices drop and they're taking a loss, and you can only confirm that it was anti-competitive if they pushed out the competition and raised their profits back up to account for those losses. So an important decision, evidence of below cost pricing is not alone sufficient to permit an inference of probable recoupment and injury to competition. So that's basically what that established. Recoupment tests become a requirement in antitrust law and the interpretation of it. In placing recoupment at the center of predatory pricing analysis, the court presumed that direct profit maximization is the singular goal of predatory pricing. Furthermore, by establishing that harm occurs only when predatory pricing results in higher prices, the court collapsed the rich set of concerns that had animated earlier critics of predation, including an aversion to large firms that exploit their size and a desire to preserve local control. So then we get into vertical integration. That was predatory pricing, vertical integration. And as a reminder, these two concepts are the two areas of enforcement this reorientation from economic structuralism to price theory have affected dramatically. So vertical integration, two or more successive stages of production and or distribution of a product are combined under the same control. So Amazon's very guilty of this right now in literally the distribution. So they have production and distribution accounted for, and a lot of times this occurs when a business is operating in one discipline and they acquire this second stage or successive stage of production or distribution, and combining that under one umbrella now. So I think an example used was with a flour company and a bakery or a baked goods company. And the flour company owned a baked goods company. And then, or the flour company acquired a baked goods company, and then began increasing the prices of flour when selling to competition, but maintaining the lower costs for their own baked goods company. And since they were the sole supplier of the flour, they could control that market. And so they were giving an unfair advantage to their baked goods branch because of this vertical integration. They controlled, you get it. Vertical integration got some serious concern during the Great Depression. That's how far back it goes, and it's well documented. Law and economic theory was sharply critical of this phenomenon during the Great Depression and after. The two main concerns are leverage and foreclosure. So the Chicago School once again cast doubt by replacing market transactions with administrative decisions within the firm. They argued vertical arrangements generated efficiencies that antitrust law should promote. So they, instead of identifying this as a problem, again, and this is the problem with thinking in terms of price and efficiency, that structuralism avoids. So instead of seeing this as the straightforward issue, potential threat to competition that it is, they take the complete opposite stance and argue that it generates efficiencies in production that should actually be promoted and encouraged. I sort of took a break on. I didn't do as much in-depth note-taking on that subject, but it's pretty straightforward and it makes sense. So why competitive process and structure matter? Current antitrust framework fails to register certain forms of anti-competitive harm and therefore is unequipped to promote real competition, a shortcoming that is illuminated and amplified in the context of online platforms and data-driven markets. This is where my bread and butter is. Notably, the present approach fails even if one believes that antitrust should promote only consumer interests. Critically, consumer interests include not only costs, but also product quality, variety, and innovation. But more importantly, undue focus on consumer welfare is misguided. It betrays legislative history, which reveals that Congress passed antitrust laws to promote a host of political, economic, ends, including our interests as workers, producers, entrepreneurs, and citizens. It also mistakenly supplants a concern about process and structure. For example, whether power is sufficiently distributed to keep markets competitive. With a calculation regarding outcome. For example, whether consumers are materially better off. So antitrust law and competition policy should promote not welfare, but competitive markets. Advancing consumer welfare is unduly narrow and betrays congressional intent, as evident by legislative history and as documented by a vast body of scholarship. The current approach fails even if one believes that consumer interest should remain paramount. So this is key here, and this is where I think Lina Khan really drives her message home, is that our current approach fails even to protect the consumer interest that it claims to do. Focusing primarily on price and output undermines effective antitrust enforcement by delaying intervention until market power is being actively exercised and ignoring whether and how it is being acquired. That's huge, and I just got a little bit more, and we'll get back to that. So pegging anti-competitive harm to high prices and or lower output while disregarding the market structure and competitive process that give rise to this market power restricts intervention to the moment when a company has already acquired sufficient dominance to distort competition. So the Chicago School's hostility to false positives and insistence that market power and high concentration both reflect and generate efficiency has undermined this incipiency standard and enfeebled enforcement as a whole. Growing evidence shows that the consumer welfare frame has led to higher prices and few efficiencies, failing by its own metrics. There's been a decline in new business growth, reduced opportunities for entrepreneurs, and a stagnant economy. So that's critical, and again, we're only 30 pages in here. I am getting into the nitty-gritty of what I'm very interested in, but importantly, hammering home here that okay, we've identified these two approaches to antitrust. We've tried one, we've tried the other. We have well-documented interpretations on both sides, and we have now had sufficient time and growing evidence to support the claim that our original, the Sherman Act through the Robertson-Patman Act were the right interpretations and intention behind antitrust, and that price theory is not only the inferior lens to view antitrust through, but that it fails by its own metrics. That there's really, quite literally, no justification or support to the claims that they're making. So, I will keep going. I'm just thinking to capture a few more thoughts here quickly. Even today, while I was working out, the news was on the TV in the gym, and Amazon got a special. It was definitely a PR move on a morning show. They are offering value grocery options for consumers. And after being somewhat armed with this information, immediately saw that's. And okay, actually, the more critical point to this being, it was on a segment about inflation in the U.S., and it was all focused on consumer, the consumer value. What is it that we're saying? Consumer welfare. So, and last night was was a presidential debate, the first debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. I think the very first question was, are people better off now than they were 4 years ago? And again, it's consumer welfare focused, it's price focused. When we look at everything, man, when we talk about the economy in this political realm, we're looking at gas prices, grocery prices, we're looking at prices, and we're not assessing the structure of everything. We're not talking about the fewer options that we have, the decrease in small businesses that are out there to provide alternatives, all of this stuff. So anyway, I will continue on and follow up with another video after I finish.